Morning, guys. Hopefully you guys are all doing well this beautiful sunny morning. It's nice outside, eh? We got 9 of you. Big class this morning. Sorry, that's 9 including me. 8. And we got, is it? It's 10:30. Hopefully everybody had a decent Easter. You guys have lots of chocolate. Yeah, I hear you, Pete. That's why I didn't give you guys a quiz on Friday. I know you guys have a lot going on at the moment, and I think we're going to concentrate on final assignments and final exams. So we're going to talk about irrigation today. Hey, Emily. Thanks for putting your camera on. At least I'm looking at somebody. Blank screens all over the place. I don't blame you guys. I would do the same thing if I was at home. Anyway, so yeah, we're going to chat about irrigation. I haven't decided whether we're going to have an assignment or a quiz on this one. So I'll ask how many of you? 11 or 10 of you. So if I don't give you guys the last couple quizzes or assignments, then the rest of your quizzes and assignments will be weighted differently or more heavily. Are you guys okay with that? As a group, do you think you guys would be okay with that? Jared's at no, maybe, but I'm saying the quizzes would be weighted more heavily, and possibly I might give another couple percent to the midterm and the final. Quiz or Stefan likes smaller, like 10-question quizzes, so I can definitely do that. Make them short and sweet. So let me know if you guys would prefer to have more quizzes or if you want me to weight the ones that we have done currently more. I guess think about it. Yeah, check your grades for sure. Anyway, for real, I'm looking out for you guys. Anywho, it's only a couple of quizzes. And at the end of the day, it'll be 10%. That'll be shifted over a multitude of the quizzes that you've taken already. So let's chat about irrigation. So I have up right now a graph of the what I'll call for you guys the old Priva system, the Priva Office Direct, which is different than you have access to the operator. I'll show you both, but I like the graphs better in the Priva Office Direct rather than the operator. And honestly, I'm a little more comfortable with this program, but I'll talk about both today. So what are we looking at here? We're looking at the irrigation triggers in zone 1 over a period of a day, 24 hours. So we're looking at the sunlight. So sunrise, you can tell right around 7 o'clock, between 7 and 8. You see the peak sunlight around 2 o'clock, and then it drops back down in sunset. What is that? I think our sunset is around here, but it looks like our accumulation of light, our sensors might be detecting some light later in the day for some reason. Yeah, it's awesome, right, Jared? Sunset's now 8 o'clock, which is around here, right? So anyway, what this means is the greater the amount of sun, the greater the amount of irrigation that we'll have throughout the day. So our irrigation on the prop bench is set on misting. So it's very frequently, and this ramp up here that looks like half a pyramid, this brown line, is the number of irrigation starts over the period, which starts at midnight. So if I pull it back, the first irrigation start would be at midnight, right? And you can see there the lines in between. So each line, each vertical line represents an irrigation start. So every time the line steps up, that means that the irrigation went off. So you can see throughout the night that the length of time between irrigation starts is longer than throughout the day. Right, so our triggers are sunlight and temperature. So if we reach a certain amount of sunlight, our irrigation times will be shorter. So that's the interval between the irrigation starts, and I'll show you that in the settings. We'll talk about that. Okay, so we can have multiple triggers to start the irrigation. I have set, and I'll show you when we talk about the settings, I have set sunlight for irrigation starts, but we can have a whole bunch of different things start irrigation, right? If you go through what we are looking at here, so measured light, like I said, is the blue peak. Vapor pressure in the leaf is the dark green. Measured greenhouse temperature is the light green. The purple is the vapor pressure in the air, right? And the difference between the two would be the deficit, the vapor pressure deficit. I won't talk about those, but what else do we see here? So last sunlight accumulation, so that last one down there, that V last SLRACC, that's sunlight accumulation, and that's the start caused by sunlight accumulation. So PPFD, when we talk about sunlight having photons and a collection, and the sensors collect the photons. Every time the sensor collects so many photons, the irrigation will start based on that. Okay, so we have that. That's what these steps are: accumulation of photons, which starts an irrigation start, and the big drop off is a reset of the accumulation. Okay, so lots to look at there on that graph. I'm sure it looks daunting and confusing, but pretty straightforward if you just read it line by line and take your time looking at it. Do you have any questions on that? What you're looking at for the graph? Does everyone understand? Yeah, please.
I have a question. It might be stupid and you might have said it. What's the value on the left side of the chart going up? Is that photon?
Yeah. So the value is whatever we've highlighted. That's not a stupid question, Graham. I appreciate the questions. So measured light is in light units, whatever we're looking at. So watts per meter squared.
Sure, okay.
And here we're looking at, it doesn't say the unit on this, but it's millibars. It's not a pressure. Okay. measured greenhouse temperature would be in degrees Celsius. Okay, so the units up the y-axis is whatever we have highlighted on the graph.
Is there any way to change
That's
that?
pardon me?
Is there any way to change that? Like, say I didn't want watts per meter squared, could I put it in ppf or something like that?
No. Let me have a look here. Your weather sensor. So sunlight, solar sensor. Here, so we only have a certain amount of solar sensor types that we can set on the Priva system and on the weather station. The global or pyranometer is in watts per meter squared. There's a PAR sensor, which measures light in again, watts per meter squared, but in the PAR range, right? And there's a linear sensor, which will measure lux or lumens.
Okay, that all makes sense. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, no problem. Converting light units is not an easy thing. There's a lot of stuff on the web that will give you that information, but it's not very translatable. I don't even know what to equate it to. It doesn't translate very well. Like it doesn't, like you can't convert it like a centimeter to inches. It's not as easy as that. It's kind of like French to English. When you convert that language, when you're speaking direct English to French, it has a different meaning. The light units don't translate exactly the same. But anyway, light units. So y-axis is whatever we have highlighted on in the legend down here. Okay, the x-axis is always in time, and we change that time period with this little equalizer button down here just to kind of go over and review that. We can change the interval type from hours to days to months to years. We can change the start time from when you want the graph to start reading and end. You can have start dates and end dates, and we can have step sizes, which means this arrow here would push that graph forward in the amount of hours or days or weeks that you have set on to move forward on. Okay, so that's how you manipulate the graph. If we wanted to change or add any readings or status lines, we would click this plus button, and we can have a look at the amount of starts per day, the amount of starts per period. So these are all irrigation valve settings. We can look at just about anything, right? Anything that's traceable and any data that we track. A lot of stuff there. Okay. Again, any questions on the graphs that you see here? Any questions on how to read the graphs? Translating information, usable information. Is there anything here that you question why we use graphs or how would we use this irrigation graph? You guys are all good. Okay, we'll move on then. All right. Maybe we'll look at, let's look at the compass graph to see how different that is. I think I'm sharing. I wish Zoom would highlight the screen that I'm sharing. You guys are seeing the Priva operator now?
Yeah.
Thanks. So anyway, here's the graph that the Priva operator has in comparison. Not as easy to manipulate, in my opinion. Let's look at So it does track everything we need to. It's just not as easy to manipulate as the Priva Office Direct. I guess these are all. I see how this works. So every drop down must have been pre-coded. Every drop down title down here has a collection of data points that it's tracking within the system. You must be able to set that somehow, and I really don't know. Grow lights, yeah. Anyway, like I said, I like the Priva Office Direct, probably because I know how to use it. That's the biggest thing with computer controls. You're going to have people out there that will say this program is better than this program. You know, Hogendorn is better than Priva. Priva is better than Argus. Argus is the best of them all. At the end of the day, it's whatever you're comfortable using. You know, just like Android versus iPhone. You know, like whatever is best for you is what's best at that point in time. If that makes any sense. Again, they all do similar things. They all control the climate environment in a similar fashion. They just might be written a little differently. For instance, like this Priva operator is written a little bit differently, and it has a few more tweaks that you can set up than the Priva Office Direct, and that's in how you set up. You know, for instance, your fertilizer, your fertigation. There's a couple different settings in the operator versus the Priva Office Direct. Again, it's whatever you're more comfortable using. So let's go over settings before I ramble on too much and put you guys off. So irrigation settings, we'll look at the Priva operator. So it's all fairly similar to your climate settings. You have different strategies that you can choose from. Okay, conditional means that you have triggers that you'll set up throughout the day, such as sunlight, humidity, VPD, wind, whatever. We have daily, which is regardless of how sunny it is or any of the climate conditions, it's going to go off on a cycle that you tell it to. So you can have up to 30 cycles or 30 irrigation starts throughout the day. That's programmed daily. So you can have that multi-day. Again, instead of having Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, blah, blah, blah days of the week, you can have your days set up. So every third day or so, you can have an irrigation start. Or you can set it up once. So I want it to irrigate on a specific date, and you can set it up that way. So conditional is the most autonomous way to use the irrigation controls because it's relying on sensors and not by time, right? So all of these conditions control certain solenoids in the greenhouse, or valves, or a collection of valves. Okay, so under strategy, you want to start it manually, you can do so. So let's have a look at how you set up conditional or autonomous growing. So you want to use the period. Yes, what time do you want the period to start? You set it up. Right? So whatever time you want that to start. So 7 o'clock, let's say, is sunrise, and we want to follow sunrise. So we're going to set that arrow up. You guys remember that, right? arrow up is sunrise. We're going to start that at 7 o'clock and we move on. So the period starts at 7 and it ends when the next period begins. Okay. So we're doing the 24-hour clock thing. So the next period starts at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And again, we can follow sunrise, so on and so forth. So from period 1 is from 7 o'clock in the morning till 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Our maximum interval between cycles, so the maximum amount of time that the irrigation valve will wait before turning it on again is this number here, which is in minutes. Set that to whatever you feel the crop will need throughout the day. So this again is regardless of how sunny it is, if it's a cloudy day, you might want this to be, I don't know, 120 minutes, 2 hours, whatever. Right, so for every 2 hours, if no conditions are met, the irrigation is going to go off. Minimum time, right? So this is minimum rest time. So again, regardless of how hot it is or sunny it is, we're going to wait. The irrigation valves are going to wait for this period of time. Okay? So 10 minutes. So if it's really, really sunny, that's the trigger point. If it's really sunny, then every 10 minutes our irrigation is going to go off. Okay? If a cloud comes over, then we're going to have to wait 2 hours for that irrigation to come on. Right? So a little bit of autonomous growing there. The sunnier it is, the warmer it is, the more irrigation starts are going to happen. Reset accumulation at the beginning of the period. So we can have a trigger of irrigation on accumulation of VPD, accumulation of sunlight. So that's going to accumulate from the period start to the period whenever we tell it to. So if we say yes, then it's going to calculate the, let's say we have let's do this. Sunlight accumulation. Okay. So if we have our 1800 joules per centimeter squares, so when the sensor accumulates that much sunlight, irrigation start will happen, as long as we're within that 10-minute time frame. At 2 o'clock, that accumulation will reset and it'll start back down to 0. Right? So it'll look like, when we look at our graph, it would look something like, talking heads, it'll look something like this, right? So our accumulation happens, our irrigation start, and then it drops, it resets. And then it goes back up again, and then it resets. I want to confuse myself there. So start triggers. This is why we want our irrigation to start. Okay, sunlight intensity. So we have 350 watts per meter squared. This sensor is more than likely on our weather station. So it's the amount of energy coming in. That's the sunlight intensity, right? Sunlight accumulation. So how much sunlight do we accumulate before the irrigation starts? VPD accumulation. Moisture sensors. We can have moisture sensors throughout the crop. We do have one on the prop bench. It looks like a leaf, and basically it measures the resistance across that sensor, which when it's wet, the resistance is less. All of these sensors are based on electricity, so moisture sensors anyway. So the trigger could be a moisture sensor or an external start, which is, these are programmable sensors that you might have that are not necessarily from Priva. These can be anything you can plug into the system, external starts. Timers, for instance, if we wanted a timer, we can plug that in. Number of starts. So we'd use this setting if we want just like one start for the time period. We would set this less than 1. So that trigger now would be number of starts is only 1. The irrigation would go off at the beginning of the time period, and it wouldn't go off again until the next time period starts. So that's number of starts. That's what that means. Valve temperature. Right? If our valve temperature is greater than 20 degrees, irrigation will start every 10 minutes. Relative humidity, humidity deficit, VPD. Right, so if we had VPD is greater than whatever, 20 kilopascals, our irrigation will go off, right? General measurements, again, those are general sensors that are not identified by Priva. We can have our irrigation go off by wind speed, outside temperature, outside humidity, or rain. Okay, so all of these triggers, any of these triggers, you can pick 2 of them, and our irrigation can be controlled with those. We just want 1, right? We just pick 1 and we use the not used. Oops. Sorry. I froze it. Unbelievable. Technology, it's a beautiful thing. There we go. What the hell? It's not working. Unbelievable. We try it one more time. Yeah, we'll take a little bit of a right turn here. It'll fall back. So anyway, we'll use the Priva Office Direct. So, settings, irrigation start one. I kind of like this program a little better because it's easier to jump back and forth. So my irrigation start times or start reasons or triggers, they're all in kind of one little area here. I guess I'm a little more used to it. But anyway, the same thing here. You can see all the same triggers are you're able to use. It's identical, right? So if light intensity is greater than 250 watts per meter squared, then our irrigation will go off every 60 minutes. So this is our actual settings in zone 1. At 6 a.m., every day, because I don't have it following sunrise, irrigation is going to be between 6 a.m. and 8 p.m. Every hour, irrigation is going to go off for 20 seconds if these two conditions are met. If these two conditions are not met, then it'll be every 2 hours for 20 seconds. So I have the conditions as light intensity is greater than 250 meters or watts per meter squared, and our valve temperature, which is the greenhouse temperature, is greater than 18 degrees. Okay, so if one of these conditions are not met, the irrigation will be the maximum interval for 2 hours. If both of these conditions are met, then it'll go off every 60 minutes. Right? If I wanted one or the other, I can do that as well. So, and or switch. It can be one or the other, or it have to be both. Okay, so you can latch them together. Now, if I wanted this to be like a Monday, Wednesday, Friday type of deal, I can do that using clock settings. But I'm going to do it every day. The mode, right? So if you wanted it on automatic, you want this to be on, you can do that. You can program this once. So if I hit once, then the irrigation is going to go off once at a specified date. You can see I use this often. So the last time I used this was not me. It was 2005. I wasn't here in 2005. April 18th, 2005 is when this irrigation cycle went off. Or you can hit it now. So if I saw somebody walking down the prop bench, I can hit that trigger now and it would go off and get them all wet, which is fun to do every once in a while. I'm just kidding, I don't do that. Going down the strategy line here, priorities. So my prop bench is high priority, so I set it to 1. You can have multiple valves go off at the same time, and you can have multiple priorities. Right. So for instance, if you had a limited amount of water pressure and you had 2 valves going off, being triggered at the same time, it would go by priority. So I have this set for priority level 1. If my irrigation in zone 2 were going off at the same time, for instance, I would have that set for priority 2. Irrigation in zone 1 on the prop bench would go off first, and then irrigation in zone 2 would go on after irrigation in zone 1 finished. Right to interrupt. Click that to yes. That means that if these conditions are met, irrigation wants to turn on in the prop house, and irrigation is going off in zone 2. Zone 2 will stop, allow zone 1 to irrigate and finish, and then zone 2 will continue to irrigate after zone 1 is finished. So you're prioritizing your crops with that setting.
Matt, would that be like why would you want to interrupt?
So if you have a tender crop like seedlings or any type of propagation on your prop bench, and you need to keep that humidity level up, you will have the right to interrupt on that. That's pretty much the only reason why I would interrupt, unless it's you have like our hydrangeas, for instance, were on a drip line and our irrigation was going off for 45 minutes to an hour at a time, and you have another crop that's in the greenhouse and you know will need water, but it only takes 2 minutes to irrigate. You might want to interrupt that 45-minute or to an hour irrigation cycle to irrigate for 2 minutes, then it would go back. So if you have sensitive crops, then you would have a right to interrupt on that.
So it's kind of like it stops irrigating in one section and go to another because it can't handle both.
That's right. The pressure isn't high enough, or you have too many valves programmed, so on and so forth. You can set all that up in your configuration, how many valves your irrigation system can handle. So yes, you're right on that, Emily. So quantity per valve. So if you have sensors like a flow sensor in your water line, you can set these quantity per valve up to liters, gallons, milliliters per dripper, etc. We do not have, I don't know why that's set to 1, but it should be to 0. We do not have a sensor, so I don't use this. Maximum time per valve, right? So this is the amount of time that our valve will turn on for, right? So our irrigation in the prop zone, in the prop bench on this specific valve is 20 seconds. Right? You can change that here. So your length of irrigation time is set here. So if I wanted that for 2 minutes, put 2.0, so that's 2 minutes now. Or you can go 120. No, you can't do that. There you go. So 2 minutes. Or go back to 20 seconds. We'll do that. Okay, so the amount of time that your irrigation stays on is set there. If you had flood floors or flood bench, here's where you set this up. So your drain valve stand time. So this is the amount of time that the plug in your drain stays in, right? So as soon as your irrigation starts, your table starts flooding, your table or flood floor, for instance, will have essentially a plug. We'll set that plug in and it will stay in for this length of time. Okay. So if you, for instance, you had a flood floor and it takes 5 minutes to fill that flood floor and you wanted to sit in water, you wanted your crop to sit in water for another 5 minutes, you would set your drain time to 10 minutes. Right? So at the irrigation starts, first 5 minutes is filling, and then you want it to sit for another 5 minutes. So you'd set it for 10. Pretty straightforward. Number of repeats. So how many times do you want your irrigation cycle to repeat? So I use this on our capillary mats. So I would put, a lesser time, allow the capillary mat to soak, and then stop it. Have some sit time for a little bit, rather than having an hour straight of water flowing through that capillary mat. The first irrigation cycle, so to speak, would soak the mat. And if I put like 3 here, and I put a time limit of, you can even put 5 minutes in between each cycle. So length of time, 15 minutes there. So for 15 minutes, the capillary mat will turn on, then it'll turn off for 5 minutes, and then repeat that cycle again, right? So that allows your crop to sit for a little bit, allow the water to soak up. That's a strategy you would use if you wanted to allow your crop to soak the water up before you irrigate again. You can use this in overhead irrigation for similar reasons. Say your crop is really, really dry, and you know how that peat moss gets when it's really dry. It's really hard to re-wet. So maybe you want to overhead irrigate for, 2 minutes, allow the top of that soil to wet, allow the water to soak in a little bit, and then you'll run your real irrigation over top of that, right? So the water will get down to the root zone rather than just wash right down the sides of the pot. So that's number of repeats. This box here is just telling you the status. Okay, so I think this page is working again. I'll show. Very similar. It's almost identical, actually. So the Priva operator versus the Priva Office Direct irrigation strategies are very similar. A few different things here. So fixed per strategy or adjustable within the strategy. So duration and quantity settings. So if we were to pick adjustable within the strategy, we would see the time per valve changes per period. Okay, so as the day goes on, we can change the amount of time our valve turns on for, or the length of time our irrigation will be on for. Okay, so if it's fixed, then we know we want whatever, 2 minutes per cycle. Flow settings. So again, we can hide these settings if you don't have sensors, whereas the other program you can't. Recipes. This is something that we don't have in the other system. Where is that set for? Recipe number right there. So when we're using fertigation units, it's going to use a specific recipe, which we can get into when we look at the different tanks that we're going to pull from, or the different watering systems that we'll pull from. And again, adjustable within. So that would just change. There you go. The different strategies throughout the day. Okay, so like I said, as these programs evolve, we'll just have different toggles. It's not that the Priva operator can't do this. It's just it's a little more cumbersome. So there's just different triggers or different selections in the Priva operator, and that's what I mean by whatever you're comfortable with. All systems are very similar in what they do. It's just how you find the settings. All right, so that's how you set up irrigation, right? So when you start a job, if you're ever able to use the computer control system, this is more than likely where you're going to spend a lot of your time when you're looking at irrigation. You're going to look at time between irrigation starts. You're going to look at irrigation triggers. And you're going to look at length of time that you want your irrigation to turn on. These are things that I change on a regular basis. I changed them actually today on the prop bench. You notice things are too dry or too wet, you're going to make adjustments as you go. Okay, any questions on how to set up your valves? This is a specific valve within the greenhouse that you're setting up. Nothing? You guys are all good with that? So you're saying you can walk into a greenhouse and set up some irrigation. I love it. Or at least be familiar and muddle your way through it, like we all do for everything we start with. It is pretty straightforward until you start looking at the screen. Cool. Irrigation valves. So the first little bit there, we talked about how to set up irrigation. Looking at valves, looking at water systems, etc. It talks about where we want to put our water in the greenhouse. So when we look at the Priva operator, we look at irrigation valves, these are just labels, right? Irrigation valve 1, 2, 3, and then we've got 40, whatever. So again, these are where we want to direct the water to. If you think about our greenhouse, irrigation valve 1 could be one valve in zone 1, or it could be a combination of both valves. When I say valves, it's solenoid valves in zone 1. Meaning that one setting would control both of those valves. You can set that up here. You can set up which irrigation valve is tied to. Right? We're looking at status right now, so we can't change any of these, but we're just looking at what's going on with these irrigation valves. So irrigation valve, for instance, is off. We're not irrigating. It's tied to a mist strategy, which is cooling the greenhouse or adding humidity to the greenhouse itself. Number of irrigation starts per period or cycles today, we have none. Time since last start, what the sunlight accumulation is. So these are all status. So this is what's happening with that valve, right? Walk through. It's kind of like looking at a graph, but one part of it. Let's look at settings. So irrigation valve, we can have different strategies attached to these valves. If you don't want to use it, just leave it alone, no strategy. I have irrigation strategy 1. If we go back to the other page that we were on, that's what that means. So we were setting up that strategy. I don't know if we can use these anymore, these words. So slaves to irrigation valve, this valve is a slave to whatever. So if we wanted to be valve 2, then valve 2 would be controlling valve 1, if that makes any sense. Right, so this is a way that we can reduce the amount of outputs in our motherboard, in our computer. Large greenhouses will have multiple solenoid valves or multiple irrigation valves in their greenhouse. You have a 100,000 square foot greenhouse. You're going to have 100 different bays, right? And each bay is going to have a solenoid, and likely you're going to have similar crops within that space, which you'll want these crops to be irrigated in a similar fashion. So you can tie however many valves together that your water system can handle on the pressure that it gives out. Right. So say your water system has enough pressure to do 5 valves or five zones, then you can put your irrigation. You can control up to 5 irrigation valves with one strategy. That's where you start this is where you set that up. Crop aging. So think of our prop bench. We set up, we sow seeds. Those seeds start to germinate. From germination, cotyledons grow. From cotyledons to true leaf. Roots start to fill the rooting tray, and then the crop is ready to transplant. You can use this crop aging to, again, grow a little more autonomously. So what this means is I'm going to use strategy 1 for 7 days. I'll use strategy 2 for another 7 days, so on and so forth. When you're growing ornamental crops, crops like poinsettias, mums, begonias, things that have been growing for eons, geraniums, growers know those crops in and out. They know how long it takes for the seeds to germinate. They know how long it takes from germination to transplant and then transplant to finish. So you can change your irrigation strategy based on that. You can set up your greenhouse, set up your irrigation strategy, and go on vacation. Pretty simple. Anyway, this is a way that you can take a little bit of not really a break, but you don't have to go into your computer on a regular basis to change your strategies up, right? Again, it's just another way to grow a little more autonomously. So you set up your date of your sow date, whatever that might be. So at this specific date, we're going to have irrigation strategy, a little more frequent watering, maybe a little longer or a little less time between irrigation starts, and your valve might be on for a little less time for the first strategy, and then we move on to the second and the third and the fourth. All right, so that's crop aging, which is kind of a neat thing to use. So here's a few ways to manipulate your irrigation valves depending on what they are used for, right? So pause time before, so this is how to manipulate your equipment a little bit here. So each solenoid valve, you know, I assume you guys know how solenoid valves work. Your, what is that, technical, greenhouse technical? You guys know how solenoid valves work? Chad knows. You guys comfortable with how solenoids work? They basically work on water pressure, right? So anyway, so if it takes a couple of seconds for your solenoid valve to turn on or off, you can set this time up here, right? So if it takes like 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 4 seconds, you can pause your irrigation time to kind of reset your solenoid valve. Valve duration adjustment. So for some reason, if you look back on your set point for your valve time is 1 minute. So your valve duration adjustment is 100%. It's going to go off for 1 minute. If I put this for, I'm going to keep it easy for me, 50%, that irrigation time now adjusted down to 30 seconds. All right. So you might use this if you don't want to change your valve time on because it's tied to something else. You can adjust your duration. Your valve, you can tie it to different watering systems. So a watering system, what's a watering system? A watering system is where your water comes from, right? So our greenhouse would be termed as a pressurized water system, which is city water. It comes directly from a pipe into the greenhouse, and that's pretty much it. Another watering system might be from a pond to a pump. Another watering system might be from rainwater and cisterns. If you're recycling water, you have to pump your, so like veggies, for instance, you would pump all that drain water into a buffer tank or a holding tank. And from that holding tank, you would have a mixing tank where you would pump some of that, that used water through a filter and into the mixing tank, where you would use that mixing tank water, mix it with fresh water, and then it would go to a fertigation system. That's where you can tie your irrigation valves to if you had multiple different watering systems. Make sense? Perfect. tied to main line, so you can have multiple main lines running through your greenhouse, depending on the size. And each of these watering systems or main lines can have different pressure, therefore different amounts of valves that can be tied to it, and they can run at the same time. Valve capacity is where you can set that up, right? So your amount of water going through that valve per given time. All this would be set up through, again, this is where your greenhouse technical comes into play. Your equations that you've gone through with your pumps, how much pressure your pump can will give you, and how much water it can push up and out, right? So you're gonna measure that, and you're gonna set that up here. Usually, you're gonna have a technician help you with this, but you should know how it works. That's why we go through the practice. You could be one of those technicians someday, right? This is something that you'll set up once in a greenhouse, unless you have a greenhouse like ours where we play with things all the time. That's usually not the case, right? You're usually growing a crop that you know, and that crop is consistent, whether that's vegetable crop or ornamental. Your valve capacity really isn't going to change much unless you change your pump. And you're not going to do that on a regular basis because it costs money. And we want to spend as little money as possible. Number of drippers, again, that'll be for your capacity. You know, if you had 100 drippers down the line, you would put that here. Coverage area, how much water, how much area is one sprinkler, for instance, going to cover. Which sensor do you want your valve to look at is what this next line is. Next 3 lines: valve temperature sensor, humidity sensor, and VPD sensor. You can have multiple through zones, so you want to definitely point to the right sensor. Right, it's usually going to be air temperature 1, or anyway, you can manipulate that. Drain valve fill state. Why won't this be for everyone? Yeah, that's, I guess you have to configure which, anyway, I'm not going to get into that because those ones are, I'll have to look at the help on that one. And you know what, if you're looking at operator, you guys do have access to Priva operator, and in that Priva operator has a whole bunch of different help topics. Type in irrigation and look at all these topics that come up, right? So even if the page number, you don't have page numbers in this, do we? No, we don't. Anyway, the help, irrigation drain configuration. So if I wanted to know that, I would look at this help page and I would read that help page, but it doesn't make for great TV, so I'm not going to read that right now. I'll let you guys figure that one out. How about that? There's your homework. You can figure out what drain valve fill state is through your help, your compass help. You know what? Maybe that'll be your assignment. I'll do an assignment based on. I'll give you like a little scavenger hunt on your. You'll get to figure out how to use your Priva help. Okay, cool. So configuration, that is your irrigation configuration. All right, so all of that is your zone configuration, your valve configuration. That's how you set up your irrigation in your zones. Now we look at watering systems. And this is basically how you fill your tanks. Right? So your water system is is where you're getting your water from. So your tanks or your pressurized systems. Again, this is stuff that you'll probably configure once, and we'll move off from there. So I'm not going to get into too much depth into configuration and settings for these tanks. What we can look at is recipes and specific tanks. All right, so your status, here's your pH and EEC in that specific nutrient tank or watering system. So in order to get an accurate reading, you really have to have moving water through your pipes, right? So you're going to have a loop of some sort. So for those who have been in the cucumber house, we do have, believe it or not, we do have an EC pH loop just underneath the dosatrons. It only works if the water is running, so it doesn't work all the time. It's just measuring resting pH and EC, which could definitely climb pretty high. So anyway, here's where you set your recipes in your tanks. Your desired EC, your desired pH levels you set here. The sun intensity, which this is a little tweak from the Priva operator. It doesn't have this. So basically you set your desired EC and pH and you're good to go. In this setting here for this tank, we have low sun intensity and high sun intensity. So here it should be, say my desired EC in general is 2 millisiemens per centimeter, sorry. And our dosing system is going to try and keep that EC level up to 2 until it reaches a high sunlight intensity. Then we're going to lower our EC. Why do we lower our EC if we're getting more sun? We want to fertilize our crop if we're getting lots of sun. Why do we lower it, you know? You guys sleeping on me?
More frequent irrigation times, so you want less EC delivered per irrigation, so you don't over fertilize.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, you don't want to burn your crop, right? We're going to have more frequent. Exactly, Emily. That's right. You guys got it. You guys are wicked smart. So anyway, we're going to lower our EC as the sunlight comes out. Like you guys said, we're going to have more frequent watering, so we don't want salt buildup. Anyway, so that's recipe. That's how you set your recipes. Our pre-rinse time and our post-rinse time is time set to run clear water through the lines before fertilizing and after fertilizing. So we're going to try and flush that whatever fertilizer we have in the line through it to get rid of it, so the next set of fertilizer can come through unscathed and uncontaminated. Say if we have a crop of hydrangeas where the specific mix of fertilizer is pertinent to its color, we want to rinse that line out before we fertilize again. Get all that aluminum out before we fertilize the pink, right? Anyway, so that's pretty straightforward, pretty simple. set your pH and EC and walk away. Advanced settings, so we're looking at EC, full control. You'll more than likely keep it at full control. No control, so we don't have any EC or pH. Alarm control, so only if our EC is out of whack, we'll control that. So we want full control. We're going to keep that in full control. pH dosing type. If we have acidic water, you can add bicarbonate. But we do not. We have high calcium in our water, so we have lots of bicarbonate. So we want to add acid to our system. Most places will. There are, like if you're getting water from a well, for instance, won't let me. Anyway, whatever. So we can change our pH dosing type from acid to bicarbonate. Again, we can add another pre-rinse and a post-rinse. Use channel with recipe 1. So dosing channels. Hey.
Have you heard from Mike at all? Do you know exactly what he's doing?
I don't know what Mike's doing. Neither does my class. You guys know what Mike's doing? So dosing channels. You know, where do we want the fertilizer to come from? Do we have different types of fertilizer going into the system? This is where we can change that. So 100% nitrogen or 50% phosphorus. You know, whatever channels we have, we can pull from different tanks. All right. Configuration takes a couple seconds. No configuring. Perfect. Here we go, proportional, integral, and derivative control again, right? So this is where we can set up how to tweak the amount of fertilizer that comes out of the dosing systems, right? So our proportional control, our integral control, we can tweak if we notice our EC is too high coming out of the end of the hose, or if it's too low for some reason, and we know that we've mixed our fertilizer properly, we know that our sensors are calibrated and working well, there's something else going on, maybe some, I don't know, build up in the pipes or something. Anyway, we can tweak the amount of fertilizer that comes out. So again, we're looking at the distance from our control versus where our measured is. We'll add 3% for the amount of time or sorry, not the amount of time, the amount of EC that we're away, right? So if we want an EC of 2 and we are 1 consistently coming out, we can change this to increase the amount of fertilizer coming into the dosing system. And again, same thing with the integral. The amount of time that it is away from, we just keep adding. Be careful when we're playing with this, because this can definitely affect the amount of fertilizers coming out at once, which could burn your crop, right? So where do we want to draw from? Where do we want our fertilizer to come from, right? We can have different tanks to come from it. We can have different sources, a remote recipe versus an irrigation tank. I'm honestly not sure what a remote recipe would be. So that would be something that I would look up in my help. Sorry, there's a lot going on. It's distracting. Anyway, dosing channels. What type of pumps do we have? Are they EC? Are they pH? Are they bicarbonate? Whatever, 8 acids. Injector type, analog versus servo versus frequency drive versus recipe selection valve. So these are just different types of injection pumps, so to speak. So a servo pump would be something similar to, I guess you guys didn't really use them for the lettuce. They're kind of like diastolic pumps, where the mechanism actually pulls fertilizer as the mechanism turns. It sucks a certain amount of fertilizer up through the hose and injects it into the system. Whereas an analog would be, it's measuring your EC readings as it's going through, or like a pump is pulling it out, measuring your EC through electrical conductivity, through electricity going over a probe. And a frequency drive, you will tell it the amount of pulses that it's going to. So four pulses is going to pull so much fertilizer out of that tank. So anyway, again, these are something that you'll set up, and your technician will help you to determine what type of injector you have. And you'll set that up once unless you change that. All right, do you guys have any questions as I go? Oh, Pete has a question. How would you know that your EC and pH sensors need to be recalibrated in your pipe? Good question. You usually have redundancies set in. So in your loop, you would have 2 EC sensors and 2 pH sensors. And you definitely want to test with handhelds on a regular basis. So yeah, you definitely want to make sure that everything's reading properly, right? Don't just set it and forget it. Make sure that's what a good grower is going to do. They're going to do their due diligence and make sure. So you're going to have alarms set up. Is there an alarm? Anyway, I'm sure there's a spot where there's an alarm set up between your first EC and your redundant EC meter, and same thing with your pH. If there's a difference of whatever set point that you make, then the alarm will go off, and then you'll know to check and recalibrate those sensors. Answer your question, Pete? Yes, cool. Any other questions on setting up water channels and irrigation valves? I know this is riveting stuff, but Chad, you're good. So irrigation tanks, you can set it up to fill. So this is where, sorry, I'll go back a second, run through things quickly. So your irrigation tanks, you can have multiple tanks set up to pull water from and pump water to. So these could be your mixing tanks, where you're going to send your quote unquote dirty water or your buffering water, and where you're going to add your fresh water, right? So you're going to have float valves in these tanks, and you're going to say keep to a certain percentage full, and once it drops below a certain percentage, we're going to have fresh water, or whatever water that we want to add into there come into the tank. Okay, lots to think about, lots to set up. But again, most of your time is going to be set up or spent setting up the irrigation valves and your irrigation strategy. Again, some of your time is going to be spent setting up your nutrient recipes, and you're going to be tinkering with this on a regular basis, right? So I would suggest to get familiar with your nutrient recipes and your irrigation valves for irrigation settings. Cool. I don't know what else to talk about with this. Is there anything else you guys want to go over? Is there any other questions you might have with irrigation? Is it what you were expecting? Is it like, wow, that's way more simple than I thought?
Would we be able to see, could you show us what adjustments you made in the prop house this morning and why you made them?
Absolutely. Do that.
Pretty cool.
Thank you. Okay, so you guys can see the Priva office client now, I assume. If not, get on there and yell at me. So I had a missed setting set up on valve number 32. 32 is the far bench on the in the prop house. Okay. So the misting I use for propagation, it is largely used for fogging or for humidifying or cooling a greenhouse. But I like it because it's a little more control. It's going to go off based on timers rather than triggers. Basically, when it's sunny out, it's going to water. And it's based off of humidity. Okay, so this is what I had it set for. And it's based in seconds, right? Another reason why I like Office Direct is because it shows you your units, whereas the Priva operator doesn't. Anyway, so 1200 seconds. Don't let me do math. What is that? 20 minutes, right? For a low sun interval, and then 15 minutes for high sun interval. We'll just say that. 1200 divided by 60. Anyway, I don't want to do math. Anyway, so here is my mist duration is set for 10 seconds. My maximum light intensity is 300 watts per meter squared, and my minimum is 150 watts per meter squared. About 150 watts per meter squared, it's going to go off every 1200 seconds. When it hits maximum light intensity, it's going to go off for 900 seconds, right? And it's going to go off for 10 seconds every 15 minutes. As long as it's under 85% relative humidity and 18 degrees or over. So it's got to hit all of these in order for it to irrigate. Notice that it was a little too wet, so we decided to change that. And I changed it to change it to this setting here. So it's going to go off every hour, as long as we were looking at 400 watts per meter squared, and it's 80% or under relative humidity. If it doesn't meet these two, then we're going to look at 2 hours, and it's going to go off for 30 seconds. All right. I want to change this, and this is something I didn't change. I want it to interrupt, I want my propagation to be first priority. I don't really care if it interrupts or not, because we don't have a lot of irrigation going off. I'm going to turn it on. And thank you, Emily, because I just set this up. I didn't look at any of these. So the irrigation was set for off, actually. So we'll turn it on, and now we have it set up properly. We're in zone 1. We got to make sure we're in the right zone. And we're going to set it until perfect, sundown, 8:03. And we're going to have no irrigation at night. Cool, Emily? Awesome. We have straight water because that's what our watering system is. We fertilize through dosatrons. We do not have tanks. We don't have fertilizer injectors, fertigation, or anything like that to worry about, or EC to set. So this is straight water coming out of our misters. All right, any other questions? Any other comments on irrigation? Anything we want to look at or go over, or review how to look at stuff? You guys all good? I lose everybody? Thumbs ups. Corey's got a thumbs up. Emily's got a thumbs up. Awesome. All right, that's all I got then, guys, unless you want to sit here and chat. You have other unrelated questions. All right. What do you got, Chad? Who won the Final Four? I don't know. I didn't watch any.
All right, thanks, Matt.
All right, guys. Oh, will there be a PowerPoint on this? I joined late. Yeah, there is a couple PowerPoints up there where I've posted, and I will post the recording. Get to listen to this all over again. I envy you guys. I really do. All right, thanks, guys. I'll see you when I see you. We're looking at a couple weeks left, right? So like next week, I think I'll post a review, and our final is coming up, just to put a little more pressure on you. Just kidding. For the hydrangea report, will you be posting a document with some kind of specifics, exact dates? So Chad, it's not really a report, so to speak. It's a how-to type of deal. How do you grow it? What events, what things do you need to do in order to make a success, or to grow a successful crop? So whatever references you want to use. So it's not specific to our crop, but you can make it specific to our crop if you wanted to. You can use Derek's PowerPoints as reference. You can use websites as long as you reference those websites. And you can use anything we've chatted about in pictures that you've taken along the way, as detailed as you want to make it. No, it's not weighted. It's not going to count. Is it just in the greenhouse? What do you look? So midterm review is not going to count. Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, I would, for hydrangeas, I want you to go from cutting to finished product. So not necessarily field grown, it could be potted and then put out. So when we say in the field, it's probably potted, pot to pot out in a drip line somewhere. But anyway, you can go with that. All right, good to go. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you. We'll see you when we see you.
See you later.